Hi everyone, a very warm welcome to Life, Loss and Hope. Thank you for joining us today. And today I'm talking about a difficult subject. I'm talking about healing in grief. When I post on my Facebook page, it is usually a variety of photos and stories of grief, love, encouragement, hope, comfort and inspiration. Not every post speaks to the same people. Some are liked, some are loved, and others have been less well received or can even make people angry. It's not surprising, as everyone is at a different stage in their grief journey, and therefore their feelings, challenges and emotions can be different at different times. And of course, we all have our own unique experience of loss and grief. But what I have noticed is, though, the subject of healing in grief can be very loaded for lots of people, and they can react negatively even to the notion of healing in grief. I'm often asked what it means to heal in grief. It's a question that I've pondered for over 40 years, and I'm even not sure now I know what it fully means, but perhaps I'm a little closer to understanding its complexity. And it's a question that I'm also going to ask you. What does healing look like to you? The old adage that we heal with time, we often hear. This can be unhelpful or even annoying when you are in the grip of grief. Time seems to have no meaning, and yet we see it stretching like an endless road ahead of us, covered in the broken wreckage of our life. It can feel totally overwhelming when one moment is all we can manage. But what I've learned is that time by itself isn't a healer, but what it does do is it will give you the time and space and perspective to restore and process what has happened to you. It's also what we do with that time that makes the difference. So let's just say I broke my leg and allowed time alone to heal it. The bones would eventually knit back together, but it is likely that my leg may not be fully functional again, and I may have limited mobility. However, if I set it in a cast and kept that on for the recommended time, kept my hospital appointments, did my physio and exercises at home, my leg would have a better chance of regaining maximum functionality. The same is true of grief. It is like a physical wound that demands care, attention, rest, recuperation, and time. If we do nothing with our feelings, if we deny them, bottle them up in the hope that they'll go away, they only get louder and more intense, and perhaps surface years later like a tidal wave. When we are ready, it's healthy to fully face our overwhelming feelings, feel the pain and work through the trauma and loss to begin the journey of reorganization and healing in our lives. So back to the question. What does healing look like in grief and loss? Let's start by looking at dictionary definitions of healing. As an adjective, it means the process of becoming healthy or sound, restoring to health, getting well and mending. As a noun, it's the act or process of regaining health. And as a verb, it is the ongoing, engaging in normal life and becoming well. Perhaps this definition from Dr. Mac Licata is one that seems to me to get closer to encapsulating it. True healing is not a state where you are liberated from feeling any pain, but you are freer and more flexible to experience it more fully. There seems to be lots of misconceptions about healing in grief and loss that are intrinsically built into us and have become our grid for what healing looks like. Mostly when we refer to healing, it's used for something that we can see tangibly: a physical wound, an illness, a broken bone, a relationship rift. So when we have come to understand that healing is a complete process, a final act, a total back to normal, feeling totally well and everything being fine, this isn't helpful in grief. This idea can be impossible and feel elusive and is unrealistic in grief. And so when healing is actually mentioned, if you're grieving, maybe our preconceived ideas jump up and stand in the way of us even being open or willing to the healing transformative process of restoring wellness in our mind, body and spirits. Therefore, our internal definition or perception of healing can be a block to engaging and moving forward, to embrace the natural process that pulls us forward to regain wellness and reintegration into a new life that can even be purposeful. If we can accept a new definition of emotional healing, it is the beginning of the road through the valley of darkness towards light and hope. Changing our thoughts is the basis of cognitive behavioural therapy, which is used in counselling and coaching. There's nothing new about this concept, as the Bible tells us that we should renew our minds. Fundamentally, it's about taking a thought that produces negative responses in us and replacing it with another that is more life-giving. In grief, we tend to develop stories around events, and these can be very unhelpful and distressing, therefore not helping us to think truthful and healthy thoughts. I'll give you an example. At my brother's funeral, there was 2 big video screens at the front of the crematorium, and the leading photo was one of my entire family as we were as children, my parents, my grandparents, my sister and my brother. When I saw it, I was so shocked, as I had been very distressed after his accident. But when I looked at that photo, I felt absolutely devastated. I felt alone, and all I could do was keep on thinking, everyone in our family has died but the 2 of us. It felt like a hammer to my heart. And every time I thought that for weeks and even months afterwards, I would cry and I felt bereft and alone, and I would tell myself, there's only 2 people left of my family. I became stuck in that despair until I heard David Kessler training on this subject. And I asked myself, was this really the truth? And when I thought about it, yes, it was true of that photograph, but actually not true now, because my family is in fact much bigger, with my husband, my 5 children, their other halves and 7 grandchildren. We have a big family. And that realization was so healing. So I chose to stop thinking that old thought that made me so negative, and I did feel lighter and more positive. I've also worked with other people through these kind of constraining thoughts about themselves and their futures. People often say things like, I'm broken. I never see anybody anymore. I can never love again. I can't live without that person. And these things are real feelings that I have felt too, but they're not the end of the story. For me, as I changed my words, I would say things like, instead of saying I'm broken, I would say I'm healing. Instead of saying I'll never get over it, I would say I'm learning to live with it. And instead of saying I'll never love again, I would tell myself I can learn to love again. I know that sounds simplistic, but it does engage your mind with a future and a hope. And if we can embrace what healing is not, perhaps we can go forward with what it is. Healing is not being disloyal, disrespectful, forgetting about your loved one, or something to feel guilty about. Healing in grief is not a destination to arrive at or a complete process, but a willingness to journey through and with the tough emotional roller coaster, accepting that healing is a continuous process, lifelong. It can be part of our life going forward. Personally, I became more aware of my own healing as I emerged from the day-to-day pain and fog of deep grief, with what I can only describe as glimmers of hope. Perhaps I smiled after a song that reminded me of my loved one, a day that I didn't cry most of the day. I slowly started running and writing again. I began sleeping better at night and wanting to eat nutritious food. I didn't dread so much getting showered and dressed in the morning. I was ready to go through old photos and their possessions. I even found myself beginning to laugh and not continuously sigh. I decorated for Christmas again. I was ready to share my story. And when I began to think of the good memories and not feel overcome with sadness, it was a good healing sign. My world had shifted from black and white to some colourful moments. And now I look back and I see these things as healing signposts along the path of grief, like I was reclaiming my life, even though it didn't look the same as it did before. I did experience healing, and I realized that healing wasn't a linear journey. There was many starts and stops. Sometimes I felt like 1 step forward and 3 back, but the common ground was continuing to see light and hope, no matter how dim at the end of the tunnel. And the light did get better with time. So my prayer is that you can open your mind, your body and your spirit to a healing journey and focus on a life going forward.